Hey guys, we're back in Revelation and we are in week 2 of Revelation here at Refuge Church in the youth group. And guys, I hope you enjoyed last week. I know I did. We started in chapter 1 and we just kind of went verse by verse through chapter 1 and we saw that this Revelation is actually a letter. And this is John himself, John the Apostle, writing a letter to 7 different churches and he names them out. And this is actually John telling the churches what Jesus has spoken to him. So Jesus is the one revealing these things. That's why this is called Revelation, because Jesus himself is revealing something to John in order for John to tell them, to tell the church these things. And so these things were specifically for the church and they're applied to us today. We can glean truth from these things today, and today we've got something really cool before we actually dive into the vision that John sees. So we don't get to the big vision or the beginning of the big visions until chapter 4. But in chapter 2 and chapter 3, right after John hears from Jesus, Jesus says, okay, I want you to write these things to the churches. So he's going to take the churches one by one, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, all these churches, and Jesus himself is going to speak into the lives of these churches and tell them exactly what he wants them to know. So let's just go, we're going to go one by one through these letters to the churches, and it's probably about a paragraph or two long on each of them. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, but the whole thing, all 7 churches, takes up about 2 chapters. And so I'm going to read one of them, and then we're going to go off of that one and just kind of talk about the rest of them. Because since we don't have a lot of time today, we've only got about 15 to 20 minutes. So let's start chapter 2, verse 1, and I'm going to read through verse 7. This is for the church in Ephesus. So this is the first church that John writes to, because this is the first church that Jesus is speaking to. It says, to the angel of the church in Ephesus write, the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand, who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil, but have tested those who call themselves apostles and are not, and found them to be false. I know you are enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. So all good stuff so far. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love that you had at first. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. Repent and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent. Yet this you have. You hate the works of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So, he kind of goes through this formula, and with every church he hits every single church one by one, and he kind of goes through this formula. It's a little bit different from church to church, but this is kind of what he does. Jesus says, okay, I am this, and he kind of brings something back from what we saw in chapter 1. He says, this is the words of him who holds the 7 stars in his right hand and walks among the 7 golden lampstands. That's directly from the vision of Jesus that we see in chapter 1. And so this is who's speaking to you, church. I'm the one who is among the church, who's among the 7 golden lampstands, and I hold the 7 stars in my right hand. I have control over you, church. I have sovereignty over your situation. You can trust in me, and I'm walking among you. I'm seeking you out. I'm with you. I'm dwelling with you, but I can also see what you're doing. I can see everything about what's happening in your church. That's how he starts off. He starts off kind of like that in every single church. And then he goes on to say, okay, I like this about what you're doing. And then he goes on to say, I don't like this about what you're doing. And then he says, okay, I want you to repent from what you're doing that I don't like. And then he says, He'll say something like, okay, to the one who does repent, the one who does conquer, and who perseveres to the end, I will reward you in some way. And in every church, he specifies a different reward. And then he says, to the one who has an ear to hear what the Spirit says, listen. Listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches, and I will reward those who conquer. And he does this in every one. He says, "This is who I am. You can trust me because of this. I am seeking you out." He says that in every one, and then he says, "I like this about you. I don't like this about you. Repent and conquer, and listen to what the Spirit says." Every single one. This is kind of what we're seeing. And so, in the first one, to the church in Ephesus, let's just kind of go through this a little bit. He says, "I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. You cannot bear with those who are evil. You've tested those who are called themselves apostles and are not. You found them to be false." Okay, so this is the good thing that Christ sees in the church of Ephesus. He says, look, you're really good with doctrine. You're really good with seeing true apostles and false apostles and differentiating between the two. You're really good with true teachers and false teachers. You're really good with knowing the truth and knowing it well enough to distinguish between evil and false teachings. But here's the thing that you're getting wrong, is that you're not loving. You've lost the love that you had at first. In other words, that you've lost your love for God, you've lost your love for others. You're doctrinally correct, but you're so rigid that you've stopped loving each other. So let's bring this up here. See if I can get it up here. So they're great on doctrine, but they're so rigid that they stop loving God and others. So in the way that we're seeing this, and today in 2021, right? This wasn't written to us, this was written to the church in Ephesus, but we can apply this to our church. Does our local church look like this? And so we're going to go through every single one of them, and we'll say, okay, do we look like this? Well, what do we need to guard against this? But he says, repent and conquer, and those who conquer, I will reward. And let's see what he says in this one. He says, to the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. You will get to dwell with God and to live with him forever, eating forever from God's provision, from the tree of life. And that's kind of hearkening back to the tree of life that was in the Garden of Eden, right? So we get that as a reward, church, when we conquer and persevere to the end. Now let's just kind of go one by one. I'm not going to read them all, but the next one is Smyrna. Let's get this one up here. The Church at Smyrna. So their thing, they actually didn't have anything that Christ said, this is what's wrong about you. They were actually doing well, it seems like. Christ simply charges them to persevere against false teachers. There were those who were coming up against the church and trying to speak wrong things, wrong doctrines, wrong teachings into the church, and they were standing firm, and Christ just says, look, Smyrna, you just need to stand firm to the end. You must conquer. And to them, he says, the one who conquers, I will give you the crown of life. And this crown of life was the word used as like the garland that you get at the end of like the Olympic Games. Like you get the crown, you get this garland, you get the reward for making it through to the end. And he says, you will escape the death of the wicked in hell. You will escape that death. You won't have to go through that death. You won't have to be cast into hell. You will get life instead for those who conquer through to the end. Next, we have Pergamum. Pergamum was the Mac Daddy. This was the big one. This is the big city. This was actually the capital in Asia. And so this was the center of idolatrous worship in Asia. Out of all 7 of these were kind of main ports and main cities, but out of all 7 of them, this was the big one because this was the center of everything, and there were so many idolatrous practices going on, so many things that were just so embedded within the culture, and it just seemed normal to them. It seemed normal to them, and the problem is not just was it in the culture, it was creeping into the church. There were gods that were being worshipped. There were pagan practices that were happening. There were feasts that were happening. These were creeping into the church to the point that Christ calls them out and says, look, if you don't repent, I'm going to take away your lampstand. I'm going to take away your lampstand. You're not going to be a church anymore. You must repent. You must conquer. You must rip out these pagan practices that you're falling into. Let's see what else he says. Sorry. So because they are taking part in this, Christ himself is coming to them and urging them to repent. He's not leaving them alone. He's not saying, okay, you're done, I'm just through with you. He's saying, I'm coming to you right now. I'm begging you to repent. And the one who conquers, here it is again, the one who conquers will receive the hidden manna and a secret white stone. And there's a couple different ways that people take the hidden manna or the secret white stone. We can just simply see it as like this intimacy, this deep, hidden, secret intimacy that we have with Christ as individuals, and we get his provision. We get his relationship. We get a relationship with him. Not that our relationship is secret, but that the intimacy that we experience is true relational intimacy. And I love that. And we get that when we conquer through to the end. What else is there? Number 4, the church in Thyatira. So there was someone within the church who called herself a prophetess, and John, or actually Jesus, calls her out as quote unquote Jezebel, which is just kind of a generic name for a woman who's coming up against the people of God. And so she calls herself a prophetess. She's within the church, and she is actually promoting these idolatrous practices within the church. And one of the big things is that these are feasts to foreign gods, and these not only feasts just eating, but these are worshiping foreign gods through sexual immorality. And so it was so prevalent within the culture that this person was saying, hey, this is normal. Like people just do this, and this should be accepted as something that is accepted in the church in a way that we can worship as well. And so this is not just a cultural thing anymore. This is being promoted within the church. And so we need to be on guard against that as well. Are we promoting things that are from the culture but not from Christ himself? Are we promoting things that are actually turning us against God and turning us into a different way, whether that has to do with our sexual immoralities or our sexual identity, or anything that the culture goes after that Christ tells us to run away from? And so this is not just something to do with worshiping someone else, but with running after something that the culture does, that Christ says that you must run away from and repent from and turn to me instead. And to them, he says, the one who conquers will receive the reward of getting to rule with Christ in the end. We will rule with Christ if we conquer through to the end. And we will receive, Christ says, we will receive the morning star. And honestly, I've dug a little into that, and it's kind of hard to tell what he means by that. But either way, we're going to get to rule with Christ. All right, got a couple more. Let's just bring the rest of them up here. Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So you see this, let me get this out of the way here. My bad. There we go. Okay. Oh, come on. There we go. Sorry about that. So we have the rest of these churches, and Christ says, okay, Sardis, you think that you're alive, but you're actually spiritually dead. he said, and he looks at Philadelphia and he says, okay, I actually don't have say anything bad to say. Just like up here with Smyrna and Philadelphia, he didn't have anything bad to say about them. But he said, look, you're small, you're being oppressed by those who are false teachers, by what he calls the synagogue of Satan, like they're in cahoots with Satan, right? And he just encourages them and implores them towards endurance. And so there's this main theme that carries on through each of these letters to the churches, like you must endure. You must listen to the Spirit. You must repent from your wrongdoings individually and as a church. You must rip that out of the church, and you must repent and turn to Jesus, and you must endure. You must conquer through to the end. And we get to the very last one, Laodicea. It's kind of one of the most heartbreaking. He calls them lukewarm. He says that you're neither hot nor cold. You're lukewarm, and I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. And you think you're rich. Other people know that they're poor. You think that you're rich. You think that you're physically rich, and you think that you're spiritually rich. However, you are wretched. You're pitiable. You're poor. You're blind. You're naked. So you think you've got it all together, but you're spiritually apathetic. You're not chasing after the things of God. You're lukewarm. You're not zealous for Christ. You're not zealous for his commandments. You're not zealous for his glory. You are poor in spirit. You are blind to the spiritual things. You are naked, and you're not clothed with righteousness. And so we can look at each of these things and look at us individually and look at this as a church. Is our church falling into any of these things? Are we doctrinally sound but spiritually rigid in love, and we're not reaching out in love? We're not letting our doctrine transform us and boosting our hearts to glorify God and to reach out to others. Are we being spiritually apathetic? Are we being, as a church, are we being lukewarm? Maybe we don't care about doctrine. Are we kind of on the other side? Do we not care about doctrine? We don't care about the truth. We want to be together and kind of do whatever the culture says and fall into whatever. Christ says repent. Christ says repent. So let's end it with this. Our encouragement is based on the foundation of who Jesus is. In every single one of these, he says, I am this, I am this. I'm the one who holds the churches. I'm the one who's the beginning and the end. I'm the first and the last. Who Jesus is our foundation for encouragement and our foundation for conquering through to the end. Second, we need to recognize where our strengths are and recognize where our weaknesses are and repent from our moral failings and repent where we're not chasing after Christ and only Christ and rejecting and refusing the things of this world that are trying to infiltrate our church. And lastly, we can only do this by listening to what the Spirit says. We must listen to what the Spirit says. We must dig deeply into doctrine. We must let that doctrine transform us into people who worship God and reach out to others in love. And we must endure to the end, and you, church, will get the reward from Christ. Those are the letters to the church, to the churches. And so next week we will dig into what begins this series of visions that John himself sees. And this is where it starts to get weird and starts to get crazy. It starts to get kind of like, okay, what's going on here? How do I interpret this? So this is what people think whenever people really think about Revelation. We're going to start that stuff next week. So see you guys then.